What would you do
You're
if a
safe
creature
here.
weighing over 400 pounds, covered in mud and blood, stepped out of the forest, not to attack, but to kneel in front of your porch, holding its dying child? This isn't a myth. It happened in the Ouachita Mountains, Arkansas, in the spring of 1993. There were no growls, no violence, just a massive hand placed over its own chest, and a slow bow of the head, as if it understood the word mercy. The people who witnessed it kept their silence for decades. A retired diner owner, a forest ranger, a small-town vet, and a 14-year-old girl who offered trust, with nothing more than a blue ribbon and a whisper, "You're safe here." In this story, you'll see how compassion built a bridge between two worlds, how a creature many feared chose to say thank you without words, how a hunter chasing fortune ended up dismantling every trap he set, and a goodbye, quiet, misty, and heartbreakingly human. If you've ever believed kindness was a weakness, this story might change your mind. So now, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? How far can a story like this reach? From the forests of Arkansas to the heart of someone across the world. Wherever you are, this one's for you. With love and quiet gratitude. It was the kind of morning that held its breath. Spring in the Ouachitas hadn't quite shaken off the last sigh of winter, and a thin veil of fog clung low over the sleepy town of Willow Run. The air tasted of wet earth and old pine, and the gravel lot behind Pike's Diner glistened with puddles catching the first hint of pale dawn. The sky, still bruised with remnants of night, had yet to decide between rain or sun. Loretta Pike, 62, leaned into the creak of the old screen door, its hinges moaning like a tired throat. The little brass bell above the frame gave a lopsided chime, sharp and soft all at once, like a voice cracking in the cold. She stepped into the porch, took a deep breath, and paused. The diner smelled of things long familiar: burnt coffee grounds, pine sol floor cleaner, and a little bacon grease that never quite left the air. Her hand reached automatically for the switch behind the counter. The neon sign out front blinked twice before humming to life. Pike's Diner. Since 1951. But this morning, the ritual felt slower. Waited. She poured the first cup of coffee for no one in particular, let the mug warm her fingers, and stared out the back window toward the overgrown field behind the property. That's when she heard it. Not quite a footstep, not quite a groan. A sound made by something too heavy for silence, too soft for alarm. Not the snort of deer, not the bark of a fox. It carried weight and pain. She didn't flinch. Out in the mist, beyond the tree line where the pines broke into meadow, something moved. Large, upright, wet. It staggered slightly. One shoulder dipped, the other braced against the weight of something cradled in its arms. The fog swallowed the legs, but the shape was unmistakable. Massive and hunched, like a figure carved from the same stone as the mountains. As it came closer, she saw the fur matted with rain, dark brown with silver laced through like old thread. It moved with purpose, yet exhaustion tugged at every motion. Loretta stepped off the porch slowly, mug still in hand. The screen door clapped shut behind her. She didn't call out, didn't run. The creature bent under the edge of the sagging roof over the storage shed. One broad shoulder pressed against the beam to keep it from collapsing. And then, with deliberate care, it lowered something to the ground. Something small. Something breathing, barely. A youngling. Its body was curled tight, soaked through, chest rising in shallow rhythm. Its hands, not paws, not hooves, gripped at air like it had once held on for dear life and hadn't let go. Its face was not that of an animal. Primitive, yes, but not alien. Hair clung to skin that was warm-toned and visibly trembling. Its eyes were closed, lids fluttering, chest fluttering, a moment away from stillness. The large creature, the mother, knelt beside it, one knee cracking a dead branch beneath her. She didn't snarl, didn't grunt. She looked at Loretta, and Loretta looked back. What she saw wasn't teeth or threat. It wasn't a thing from some backwoods tale or campfire scare. It was a mother, bone deep in fear, hollowed out by worry, trembling from the effort of getting her child here. There were no words spoken, but the eyes, amber and intelligent, begged. Help! The kind of help you only ask for when there's nothing left to lose. Loretta moved forward, one slow step at a time. Her hand brushed the rusted latch of the shed. She swung the door wide, revealing dusty hay, old tarps, and an unused kennel once meant for a hound that never came. The mother didn't move. Loretta backed away, giving room, an offering of shelter. She went inside the diner and reached for the old landline mounted beneath the calendar. It had a dial tone like an old man's wheeze. She punched in the number by memory. Coulter Ames was just shy of 30, still green in some ways, but steady where it mattered. The town didn't trust many outsiders, but they'd learned to trust him. Maybe because Loretta did. He picked up on the second ring. She didn't say hello. Don't bring anyone else, she said. Click. It wasn't a question. By the time Coulter's old Ford rumbled up the side gravel road, the fog had begun to thin, stretching into long fingers between the trees. The sound of his boots on wet ground was the only thing that made the mother stir. She turned, eyes narrowing, then softening as Loretta stepped between them and nodded once. He saw them then, both of them. The child curled in on itself, barely moving, and the towering figure beside it, chest heaving, but still. The hair on her shoulders clumped from rain. Her breathing came low and rough, but she didn't move. Instead, she raised one massive hand to her chest, splayed the fingers wide, and pressed it in. Then, with slow reverence, she lowered her hand to the ground in front of them. It was not an instinctual twitch. It was a gesture, a plea. Coulter looked at Loretta. She said nothing, just nodded. He holstered the pistol he hadn't realized he'd gripped, walked slowly to his knees beside the creature, and laid his jacket across the small one's body. Down the hill, a mile off where County Road 12 bent near the old cotton barn, a battered truck rolled to a stop behind a screen of pine. Wade Kincaid had been driving since before dawn. A man with more regrets than teeth and fewer ethics than either. He'd spent the last few years poking around the forests with a camera and a thirst for money. Rumors stirred the dust in towns like Willow Run, and Kincaid had a nose for gold hidden in stories folks weren't meant to believe. He leaned against the hood now, squinting through the lens of a high-powered scope. Through a break in the trees, the lot behind Pike's Diner came into focus. What he saw made his stomach twist, not with fear, but hunger. A footprint, wide and deep, pressed into the mud like a fossil still steaming. The kind of print no man could make. He lowered the scope, smiled. Not the smile of discovery, but of ownership, of prey. And in that moment, while one woman made room for the impossible, while one man knelt in quiet reverence, while one creature placed its hope into the hands of strangers, another man saw nothing but opportunity. Back at the diner, the fog had lifted just enough to reveal the outline of the forest's edge. The mother moved with a quiet grace, guiding her child's head onto a folded tarp. Loretta covered the small form with a flannel blanket and sat on an upturned crate, just watching. No questions, no need. The old brass bell above the front door jingled again as wind brushed it from behind. No customers came in. No one else would, not today. The coffee sat untouched, the stove cold. And outside, in the hush of a world still waking up, the trees swayed just slightly, as if bowing in respect. Loretta looked once more at the eyes across from her, wild, weary, and utterly familiar. The look a mother gives when she has nothing left but the desperate need to save what matters most. She saw it. She honored it. And when Coulter pulled the door closed behind him and leaned his weight against it, his voice low and shaking, he said only this: "Whatever this is, we protect it. Outside, Wade Kincaid climbed back into his truck and drove off slow, but his eyes had memorized the prints. He didn't need to see the creature, not yet. The trail was fresh. He'd follow it. But first, he needed a plan, and maybe a price. Behind the diner, behind the trembling breath of a mother and child, huddled against straw in fear, the world tilted slightly, as if holding its breath. Nothing would be the same after this. And nothing ever is when the wild steps forward and asks for help. The sun broke late through the trees that morning, its light dragging across the forest floor like a slow promise. The rain had passed, but its breath still clung to the ground, and the air in Willow Run smelled of soaked bark, iron-rich mud, and the sharp green of crushed ferns. From the edge of the clearing behind Pike's Diner, the trees of the Ouachita forest stood in silence, thick with watching. Coulter parked his truck behind the shed, his tires crunching gravel still slick with night. He stepped out without closing the door fully, careful not to make more noise than the forest could forgive. He glanced toward the corner of the shed, where the flap of Loretta's old green tarp shifted in the breeze. He didn't call out. He just walked toward it, boots leaving wide imprints in the soft earth. Inside, the world had changed. The air in the shed was warmer than outside, dense with damp straw and breath. Loretta knelt near the small one, folding a quilt beneath its shoulders, her hands practiced but trembling slightly. The child, Sprig, she had started calling it in her head without quite meaning to, was curled tight, too still for comfort. It made a soft noise, not quite a cry, not quite a wheeze. It sounded like something on the edge of leaving. Beside it, the mother sat on her haunches, back curved like a mountain settling. Her arms stayed loose at her sides, but her eyes never wavered. Amber, alert. She didn't flinch when Coulter entered, only followed him with her gaze. He nodded slowly. She didn't nod back, but she didn't move either. Loretta rose, her knees stiff, and whispered to Coulter, "He's fading. Fast." Coulter reached for his belt radio, paused, and then shook his head. No, not yet. He looked over his shoulder at the trees beyond the clearing. Not with people like Kincaid sniffing around. They needed help, but not the kind that came with flashing lights and paperwork. Loretta didn't wait. She picked up the diner phone, the one mounted just outside the back porch, and dialed a number she hadn't used since her old dog Rusty passed. Amos Perrin answered on the second ring, voice already halfway to irritated. "I need you here," she said. "What for?" "I've got a patient. Might be dying." "You finally take on a stray?" She looked through the window at the figure crouched in shadow, at the child gasping shallow breaths against her chest. "Something like that," she said. Amos didn't ask more. He never had. An hour later, he rolled up in his old station wagon, the back seat piled high with duffel bags, a cracked vet case, and a plastic crate of thawed meat he hadn't bothered to refrigerate. He opened the door, stared long and hard at what sat in the shed, and muttered under his breath, "I'm too old for this kind of holy madness." But he didn't leave. He knelt beside the child, checked the gums, the breath, the limpness of limbs. No fever, just cold, the worst kind. He unpacked his saline bag and an old IV set, the same one he'd once used on a buck that got tangled in barbed wire near Oak Creek. Loretta held the tiny wrist, if you could call it that, the skin warm but dry, papery. Coulter wrapped a towel around a jar of hot water and placed it under the blanket. The mother didn't interfere, not once. She watched Amos with a focus so sharp it made his scalp itch. When he knelt close, she leaned forward slightly, as if she might launch forward if he did something wrong. But she didn't growl, didn't breathe heavy, just stared. Her fingers curled in rhythm with the child's chest. "She hasn't eaten," Loretta said quietly. "I gave her some venison earlier. She pushed it away. She's starving. She doesn't care." Amos nodded. "Some animals do that. They give everything to the young, even when it kills them. She's not an animal. Loretta said, softly but firm. Amos didn't argue. He pulled a small plastic tray from his case, lined it with slices of raw meat still red and wet from the drive. He slid the tray across the ground slowly, eyes down. It stopped just short of her toes. She looked at it, then nudged it forward with her knuckles until it touched the blanket near the child. Coulter watched all of this from the far corner, his mouth dry. His rifle still lay in the back of the truck, untouched. Loretta knelt again. "You see it, don't you?" she whispered to Coulter. "She won't eat unless he does." "I see it." Loretta placed a hand on the old wooden crate beside her, steadying herself. She looked up at the towering figure in front of her, fur-matted, face lined with exhaustion, and found something she hadn't expected to see so clearly in the wild. Devotion. Pure and quiet and absolute. The door creaked behind them. A soft gasp followed. Maisie Bloom, 8 years old and barefoot, stood in the doorway with her fingers tight around a scrap of silver ribbon. Her hair was braided on one side, the other a mess of curls from a night of sleep too restless. She didn't speak, just walked forward slowly, tiptoeing across the boards like she might wake something fragile. Loretta turned, about to stop her, but the girl had already crouched down beside the old dog blanket folded into a nest. She reached into the pocket of her nightgown and pulled out the ribbon. It shimmered faintly in the low light, almost blue, almost silver. She tied it into a tiny bow, then gently placed it beside the child, right near the edge of the blanket. "For good dreams," she whispered. The mother shifted slightly, nostrils flaring, then exhaled slow through her nose. Maisie looked up at her. "You're safe here." No one corrected her. Out in the front of the diner, the door jingled. Loretta's stomach tightened. She rose, stepped outside, and wiped her hands on her apron out of habit. A man she didn't know leaned against the counter, wiping fog off his glasses with a gas station napkin. His truck was still running outside. "You open yet?" he asked. "Just the basics. Coffee, eggs, grits." "Smells like wet dog out back," he said, chuckling. "You folks got a stray?" She smiled. Old Coyote came sniffing around the garbage. "Happens after a rain." He shrugged. "Guess that's springtime for you." She poured his coffee. Her hands didn't shake. That night, the diner was quiet. The rain returned, soft and steady, tapping on the tin roof like a memory repeating itself. Loretta had pulled a few more old blankets from the upstairs closet. Maisie had fallen asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around a stuffed bear, missing one eye. Coulter took first watch, sitting near the back door with a flashlight resting on his lap, its beam turned off. Amos had gone home to grab antibiotics and a better stethoscope. Sometime around midnight, the wind shifted. It came low, like a moan through pine needles, rising up under the eaves of the diner. Then came the sound, metal on metal. A shriek, high and quick. Coulter bolted upright. Loretta followed, heart in her throat. They stepped onto the back porch, rain soaking their shoulders in seconds. There, just past the shed, something glinted in the dark. Coulter walked toward it, slow and careful, light sweeping through the weeds. Then he saw it. A bear trap, new, shiny, teeth wide open like a grin in the dirt. His face darkened. He knelt, released the pin, and folded it shut with effort. The snap echoed. He picked it up and turned toward the tree line. Somewhere far beyond, a silhouette moved, just a flicker in the dark, watching, waiting. Wade Kincaid. Coulter didn't chase. He didn't need to. They both knew the game had started. Inside, the mother growled low, a sound that rumbled the boards. She stood in front of her child, shoulders hunched, arms spread slightly. Her eyes burned, amber in the dark. Coulter returned and placed the trap on the porch beside him. Then he sat down. He didn't sleep. Neither did she, and by dawn, everything felt thinner. Like the edges of something had begun to fray. Rain came hard that morning, thick and fast, hammering the tin roof of Pike's diner like it was trying to knock loose a memory. The gutters hissed with overflow, muddy rivulets pouring off the edges, carving soft gullies into the gravel lot behind the shed. Inside, the air was warm, muggy with breath and silence. The mother hadn't moved all night. She sat still beside her child, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the blanket, her head tilted low in the shadows, eyes half-lidded but watching everything. Sprig's breathing had grown steadier but shallow, like someone learning how to stay in this world a little longer. Coulter was already soaked through when he found the trap. The wind had shifted just enough to lift the tarp behind the shed and reveal the steel jaws gleaming wet under the porch's overhang. It was wedged deep near the edge of the fence line, hidden behind a sheet of vines and leaves, freshly oiled, set wide, ready. The kind of thing that wasn't meant for coyotes or raccoons, too large for that, too clean, too intentional. He stared at it for a long time, blinking away the rain dripping from his eyebrows. Then he knelt, hands steady but jaw tight, and disarmed the thing with a grunt. The steel snapped shut with a mechanical clap that echoed across the empty field behind the diner. He stuffed it in an old burlap feed sack and slung it over his shoulder, feeling the weight of it press against his spine. His boots sloshed back through the mud. The sky above cracked white with another bolt of lightning. Inside the shed, Loretta sat with a chipped mug of milk warmed on the stovetop, her hands wrapped tight around it. She didn't try to hand it to the mother. She didn't need to. She just placed it carefully on the ground, exactly 1 arm's length away. Then she backed off and waited. The mother shifted, watching the steam curl upward like ghost breath. She glanced once at Loretta, then leaned forward, massive fingers brushing the cup's rim. Instead of lifting it, she nudged it forward, closer to Sprig, then pulled her hand back. Loretta's throat caught. She didn't speak, didn't need to. It was a language beyond words, a gesture that didn't ask for translation, the kind a mother makes when she's got nothing left but love to give. Coulter stepped in, soaked and furious. He dropped the burlap sack near the porch and gave Loretta a look that said more than any curse ever could. She followed him outside without a word, her apron flapping in the wind like an old flag. The rain had eased into a drizzle now, the ground steaming gently beneath their feet. "Kincaid," Coulter said.
"He saw the footprints."
"I know he did. This isn't about stories anymore. This is a trap with a target." She didn't ask what kind. She already knew. Inside, the old oil lamp flickered as the wind pressed against the shed walls. Shadows moved like ghosts across the floorboards. Loretta returned quietly, knelt beside the mother again, and gently lifted the edge of the flannel blanket. Her eyes caught on a dark bruise running across the creature's upper arm, half hidden beneath the fur, swollen and purple-black. The skin there looked damaged, like it had been caught or yanked, a memory of something cruel. The mother flinched slightly when the fabric touched the edge, but she didn't pull away. Loretta hesitated, then reached out and rested her own hand just above the bruise. Palm down, still, no pressure, just contact. The mother's breathing slowed, not quite a sigh, more like permission. Loretta sat back on her heels. Her chest hurt, not with fear, but recognition. That deep, echoing ache of someone who'd once been pushed too far, too long. She didn't need to know the details. Pain had a way of writing itself into the bones. Coulter stood in the doorway, watching both of them. He didn't interrupt, just leaned there, arms crossed, eyes scanning the trees beyond the clearing. The forest didn't feel right anymore. Too quiet in the wrong places, too loud in others. Half a mile out, beyond the rise of the backwoods trail, Wade Kincaid crouched beneath a pine slick with rain, binoculars pressed tight to his eyes. He'd been there for over an hour, boots buried in mulch, breath shallow behind a camo bandana. His fingers were numb, but he didn't care. He'd seen what he came for. Through the second-story window of Pike's diner, through the distortion of wet glass and heat waves rising from the chimney pipe, he saw the silhouette of a hand. Enormous, gnarled. Not human. It rested against the inner wall, just above the blanket where the small one lay. He didn't believe it at first, but there it was. Not some blurry print or snapped twig. Flesh and bone and proof. He didn't breathe. He just reached slowly into the side pocket of his jacket, pulled out the old Canon camera with the manual lens, and focused. One shot, then another. He clicked the shutter again, slow and deliberate, the film advancing with a sound like a whisper in the rain. He smiled. That hungry smile that never reached his eyes. The kind of smile a man gets when he thinks he's found a secret no one else is brave enough or dumb enough to claim. Lightning flashed again, turning the world white for half a second. By the time it faded, he was already gone. That night, the diner was closed early. The front lights dimmed. The sign flipped backward. No one asked why. Maisie's parents had picked her up just after supper. She waved goodbye from the back seat, her eyes lingering on the shed as if she could still see inside it. As if something in her knew she wouldn't be allowed back for a while. Inside, Loretta sat beside the oil lamp, watching its flame dance low and lazy. She didn't speak. Her thoughts moved too fast to catch. She could still feel the shape of that bruise beneath the mother's fur. Still see the way her eyes shifted when Coulter walked too close. This wasn't just fear. It was memory, and it ran deep. The rain had finally stopped, but the roof still dripped in the corners, and the wind made the window frames rattle like loose teeth. Coulter was still pacing near the back entrance, flashlight swinging in his hand like a slow metronome. Every so often he'd glance toward the porch, where the trap still sat inside the burlap sack, metal teeth dark with mud. He hadn't moved it. He wanted the mother to see it, to know someone had her in their sights, sometime after midnight. Loretta stirred from her chair. She couldn't sleep, didn't want to. The lamp was running low, its light flickering now and then like it wasn't sure it belonged in this world. She rose and stepped outside, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that made your breath visible even after the rain. Somewhere out in the woods, a branch snapped. She stopped, waited, silence. Then another sound. Not a crack, not a rustle. Metal. A slow, deliberate click, like a hinge being tested. Farther out, near the old gate behind the woodpile. She turned back inside, her voice low but firm. "Coulter." He was already moving. He grabbed the flashlight and followed her through the back, sweeping its beam across the grass, the rain-soaked boards, the stone path leading toward the woods. There, a second trap, bigger than the first, half buried beneath the edge of the firewood stack. The chain wrapped around a post that hadn't been touched in years. Coulter's face hardened. His hand moved to the holster at his belt. Then he stopped. Footprints. Not hers. Not his. Boot prints. Deep, large, and fresh. He turned toward the woods, flashlight beam cutting through the low fog that had begun to settle again. His breath clouded in front of him. He stepped forward once, then twice, then stopped. Something was watching. He could feel it, but not the mother, not the child. Something else. Loretta came up beside him and placed a hand on his arm. He was here. I know. He picked up the trap slowly, folded it shut, and added it to the sack with the first. Then he walked it back to the porch, set it down like an offering, and sat beside it. He didn't go back inside. He just sat there, rain dripping from the awning above, eyes fixed on the tree line. In the shed, the mother stirred. Her eyes opened, slow and full of weight. She rose to her knees, checking the blanket, then moved toward the corner. Her hand reached up, pressed against the wooden beam beside the door frame, and stayed there. Not for balance, for thanks, for warning. No one slept well that night. By dawn, the fog was thicker than it had been in weeks. The trees stood like ghosts. The fields were hushed. Even the birds kept quiet. And in that silence, something shifted, not in the woods, but in them. The heat came in slow that summer, like a hand resting heavier each day on the back of your neck. By the middle of June, the fields around Willow Run had gone dry and brittle, the color of old wheat and rust. Grass cracked underfoot. The air held still even when it wasn't. Cicadas sang in long, unbroken sheets that wrapped around the ears and made you feel like time had stopped somewhere between two beats of your heart. Pike's Diner stood like it always had. Peeling red paint, busted screen door that slapped shut like punctuation. Hand-painted sign over the porch that Loretta never bothered to fix. The place didn't care to impress, and by now, nobody expected it to. It just was. Always there. Always humming. This summer, though, something had changed behind it. Something soft, almost sacred, was learning how to move in the light. Sprig had begun sitting up. He'd grown stronger each day, though he never made a sound. He watched everything with a stillness that made folks nervous if they didn't understand it. But Loretta understood. And so did Maisie, who came almost every afternoon with whatever snack she could smuggle past her mama. Apple slices, a stick of cinnamon gum, a bag of butter crackers she swore were magic. She didn't try to touch him. She'd sit on the edge of the porch, crisscrossed legs and scabbed knees, and toss whatever she'd brought a few feet away, watching as Sprig sniffed at it carefully, always pausing before turning it down. He never took the first bite. He'd press it gently back toward his mother, who never ate either, not unless it was something Amos brought. Venison mostly. Raw, cold, left out on a tin tray so she didn't feel threatened. She'd push her portion to Sprig too, every time. Loretta noticed that, the way she moved without sound, always between her son and the world. No matter how safe they tried to make her feel, she never let down all her weight, never leaned fully into the shade, even when her body asked for it. Inside the diner, the air conditioner rattled but barely worked. Coulter sat most mornings by the window booth with a thermos and a folder he never opened. He watched the road like a man waiting for a storm that hadn't been named yet. Wade Kincaid's truck hadn't been seen in a while, but the silence of him felt louder than when he was near. Rumors were starting to echo out from the gas station, the bait shop, even the post office, where Mrs. Green never missed a beat of small-town gossip. Folks whispered about weird tracks, bones found outside fence lines, dogs howling at trees that shouldn't have rustled. Someone claimed they heard something scream near Elm Hollow, something too low for a fox, too broken for a man. Loretta knew the sound already. She'd heard it that first dawn, and she hadn't stopped hearing it in the corners of her sleep since. Maisie's daddy stopped by one morning with gas station coffee and asked about the smell behind the shed. Loretta told him a possum had died under the porch. He wrinkled his nose but didn't push. She watched him drive off and didn't breathe until his tail lights disappeared over the hill. That same night the storm came. No warning. No distant thunder. Just a wall of hot wind followed by a sudden dump of rain so loud it drowned out the sound of breath. Sprig jolted awake under the tarp, his eyes wild with confusion, and for the first time, he cried out. Just once. A short, desperate note that seemed to come from the pit of the world, not just his chest. The mother moved fast, faster than Loretta had seen her move since that first morning. She pulled him close, her arms shielding his body from the drops, her back curving into a dome. But he fought her, not from fear, but instinct. He crawled toward the edge of the shed and looked out at the curtain of water. She hissed softly, a sound full of warning and memory. But he kept going. Loretta stepped back. She didn't speak, didn't move to stop him. And then, like something decided between breaths, the mother stood, reached for Sprig, and gently pulled him to her side. Her amber eyes flicked once to Loretta, something hard and deep passing between them. Then she turned and led her son into the forest without a word. They vanished into the trees like ghosts swallowed by rain. Loretta stood there long after they were gone, the shed empty, the blankets damp, the smell of wild things still hanging in the air. She didn't cry. She just pressed one hand to the door frame, her fingers resting in the print the mother had left behind days earlier. Still visible, still warm somehow. She waited for them to come back the next day, and the next. But the woods stayed quiet. On the third morning, Coulter found the first sign. A thin smear of blood on the fence line, low to the ground, no more than a foot off the soil. He followed it with a flashlight and found a patch of fur caught on a barb, silver-streaked, soft, unmistakable. He said nothing, just walked back to the diner, sat at the counter, and set the tuft beside Loretta's coffee. She stared at it for a long time. Neither of them spoke. Maisie came that afternoon, bouncing through the back door with a ribbon and a handful of raisins. She stopped when she saw the empty blankets. Her eyes scanned the room like she could rewind time just by looking harder. She placed the ribbon down anyway, folded it, straightened it, then turned and walked out without saying goodbye. That night, Loretta dreamed of pine trees splitting at the roots, of something heavy moving through them with a limp. She woke up to the sound of wind brushing the walls like fingertips. The shed door creaked. She waited for the hinges to slam, for the groan of weight across floorboards. Nothing came. The next morning, Coulter brought Amos. They followed the blood trail through the woods to a narrow stream where something had clearly rested. Flattened grass, torn bark, drops of red on gray stones. Sprig's prints were there too, small and human-like. The toes splayed wide like a child who never wore shoes. But it was the deeper impression beside them that made Amos stop. The mother's print, dragging on one side. She was hurt. The wound wasn't healing. They were running, yes, but they were also dying. Back at the diner, Loretta opened the freezer, hands moving on autopilot. She took out what little venison they had left and packed it into a cooler. She didn't know where to bring it, but she packed it anyway. That afternoon, she sat on the back porch with her apron still on, hands stained from pitting cherries for a pie she never baked. The ribbon Maisie had folded sat on the windowsill. The trap Coulter had found last week still leaned against the porch rail, untouched. It gleamed in the heat, the sun catching its teeth like a warning. By dusk, she knew, they weren't coming back, not unless someone brought them home. And just before the last light drained from the treetops, before the first stars punched through the clouds, Coulter looked up from the radio and said one thing. "We wait one more night." Loretta nodded. One more, always one more, and still. Something in her chest ached like the forest was pulling something out of her. Something quiet, something sacred. She closed her eyes and listened. The cicadas had gone still, only the wind remained. But even that felt like it was holding its breath. By late August, the air in the Ouachitas had turned restless. Thunder rolled dry across the hills before the sky even darkened, like something in the clouds was pacing. The trees rattled without wind. Cicadas droned like they were trying to drown out whatever was creeping closer. Everything felt taut, tied to a wire, waiting for it to snap. On the far side of the ridge behind Willow Run, a broken path threaded through the trees like a forgotten scar. That's where Coulter found them again. Down in a dry creek bed, where the rocks were pale and hot, and the water had long since pulled back into the cracks beneath the earth. Sprig was crouched beside a boulder, his small frame trembling, arms wrapped tight around his knees. His fur was dusted with dirt and dead grass, and his eyes were wide but dull, like he'd been crying without tears. The mother lay a few feet away, half curled in on herself, one arm cradling her midsection, the other stretched toward her son but not quite reaching. Her breathing was shallow, sharp. Coulter could see it from where he stood, her chest rising in uneven stutters, her wrist swollen, discolored. Infection. Bad. He didn't move right away, just stood there, caught in the weight of it. Then Amos came up behind him, panting from the climb, sweat already staining through the shoulders of his flannel shirt. He saw the scene and muttered something low and broken under his breath. They didn't speak. There wasn't room for words. Amos knelt beside the mother, slow and careful. She didn't lift her head, but her eyes tracked him. He opened the bag he'd carried over his shoulder and pulled out the last of the iodine. A needle, a thin rubber tube. Veterinary tools meant for livestock, not this. But it was all they had. Loretta crouched nearby, her hand resting gently on the ground as if asking for permission. She didn't touch the mother, just mirrored the same motion the creature had once made to her, palm flat to chest, then lowered to the earth. A silent offer. The mother looked at her, long and steady, then closed her eyes and leaned back. That was enough. Amos worked quickly. The infection had festered, swollen the tissue until it shone beneath the fur. The wound was deep, old metal scarring the muscle. Loretta watched his hands, her breath catching each time he pressed down to drain it. He didn't flinch when the mother growled low in her throat. Didn't stop when Sprig whimpered, his hands gripping the edge of the rock like he might pull the pain into himself if he could. The moment felt endless, then passed. When it was done, Amos sat back on his heels, arms shaking. He left a bottle of sulfa powder beside her and whispered, "That's all I got." Loretta stepped forward with a canteen, holding it out to Sprig. The boy didn't move, but after a moment, he took it, drank. Spilled more than he swallowed, but the effort was there. The creek bed stayed still except for the wind, which moved low through the grass like a hush. Miles away, under a stand of dying oak, Wade Kincaid tied a length of cable around the trunk of a tree. He worked methodically, checking the tension, the placement of the anchor. The snare was almost ready. He'd scouted the clearing all week, tracking the same bent branch, the same disturbed patch of soil where something big had passed. He didn't smile anymore. Not since the photograph. That shot had stayed in his truck's glove box, and every time he pulled it out, it felt colder. Less about luck, more like fate. He knew where they were going, and this time, he'd be waiting. Back in the ravine, Amos packed up the supplies and stood slowly. "We can't leave them here," he said. "She won't make it through another night if that wound opens again." Coulter nodded, then looked at Loretta. "We bring them back." She didn't hesitate. Sprig followed without sound. He held Loretta's sleeve with one hand, his gait still unsteady, the pads of his feet raw from stone and heat. The mother moved slowly, leaning on Coulter's arm, her weight a solid burden he bore without complaint. By the time they reached the edge of the field behind the diner, the sky had turned the color of rust, the sun bleeding into the hills. Maisie was waiting near the back porch, barefoot and fidgeting. When she saw Sprig, her face lit up, but she didn't run to him. She just waved. He didn't wave back, but he didn't look away either. That was enough for her. Inside the shed, Loretta spread out fresh blankets and a mattress pad she'd kept from her guest room. She tucked a folded towel beneath the mother's arm to keep it elevated. Coulter stood watch near the door, his rifle propped but untouched. Amos stayed through dinner, then through dusk, then didn't leave at all. Later that night, Maisie snuck back out again. It was past midnight. The diner was dark. The only light came from the moon, fat and pale, hanging low over the treetops. She crept toward the shed with a handful of wildflowers she'd picked earlier that day, a crown of purple clover and goldenrod. Sprig was awake. He sat near the door, knees pulled up, chin resting on his arms. When he saw her, he didn't flinch. She held out the flowers. He didn't take them. But he didn't run either. She laid them down gently in front of him, then backed away. Behind him, the mother stirred. A sudden sound snapped the stillness. A sharp metallic whine, like wire under tension. Coulter was already up. He moved past the door in 3 strides, Amos right behind him. Loretta reached for the flashlight on the kitchen shelf, hands steady despite the panic curling in her chest. Out by the wood line, they found the third trap, bigger, newer, buried beneath a layer of leaves like a secret someone meant to spring tonight. Coulter cursed under his breath. He bent down, disarmed it, and held up the cable. "He's getting closer." "He's getting desperate," Amos muttered. They brought the trap back and left it on the porch in full view. A message, quiet but clear. In the shed, the mother didn't sleep. Neither did Sprig. They stayed curled close, breathing slow, holding onto each other like the wind might try to take them away if they let go. Coulter didn't return to his cabin that night. Loretta stayed up in the diner, waiting. Maisie slept on the couch again, one hand curled around the empty flower stem. Before dawn, something shifted. The cicadas had gone silent. Somewhere deep in the trees, a crow gave a single cry, and from far off, past the rise behind the old riverbed, came the sound of something large moving, slow and careful, but deliberate. The trees listened. The ground held still. Coulter stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the dark, and said, almost to himself, "He's not gonna stop." Loretta came up beside him. "Then neither do we." And the story kept breathing, like it wasn't ready to let go of anyone just yet. Fall came in slow, like a song playing just beneath the skin of the world. The first cold had crept in quiet, nipping at the edges of leaves until the branches along County Road 12 began to glow red and copper, swaying above blacktop that still remembered summer's heat. The air smelled of wood smoke, dying grass, and rain that hadn't arrived yet. It was the kind of season where you could feel the land breathing differently, slower, deeper, like it was folding its hands before sleep. But under that stillness, something else stirred. Wade Kincaid had been gone for nearly 2 weeks. No one asked why. Folks like him came and went in towns like Willow Run. They left holes when they disappeared, not from absence, but from the silence they took with them. Loretta didn't trust silence anymore. She'd seen too many things grow inside it. That night, the diner had closed early. Coulter had stayed behind, pacing the perimeter with a lantern in one hand and the kind of expression that made people stay out of his way. Maisie had fallen asleep on the couch again, her arm dangling over the side like a branch bent toward water. Amos was at the clinic, watching a colt fight off colic. Loretta had been scrubbing the stovetop when she heard it, the crunch of gravel under boots that didn't belong. She froze. The porch boards groaned. Then came the knock. Slow, deliberate, one hand, no urgency. She dried her hands on her apron and opened the door. Wade Kincaid stood there, his shoulders damp from fog, his hat in one hand, a rifle slung across his back, and something in his eyes that wasn't quite hate, wasn't quite remorse either. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did she. Then he stepped forward, just enough for the porch light to catch his face. The stubble, the sunken cheeks, the flicker of something behind the tiredness. "Where is it?" he asked. Her fingers curled tight around the doorframe. "Gone!" He didn't believe her. She saw it in the way his eyes moved, scanning past her, into the shadows behind the window, down toward the shed that had gone dark since the first frost. But he didn't push. Just stood there in the smell of night and old rain, hands shaking slightly. Coulter stepped out from the side of the building, silent as breath, shotgun low but ready. "That's close enough." Kincaid didn't flinch. "I'm not here to hurt anybody." "No?" Coulter took a step forward. "What's that on your back then? A cane?" Kincaid glanced down, as if he'd forgotten the rifle entirely. He let it fall from his shoulder and set it gently on the porch. Not like a surrender, more like a gesture. "I saw it," he said. "Out by the old levee road, near the orchard, just standing there, watching." "When?" Loretta asked. "An hour ago." She didn't ask why he came here. She already knew. Some part of him had been dragging its heels behind his own ambition. He'd seen something that didn't fit in his world. And now that it had stared back, he didn't know how to carry it. Coulter took the rifle, checked the chamber, and leaned it inside the door. "You're lucky I'm not calling the sheriff." "I'd welcome it," Wade muttered. "Might save me from myself." Then he looked at Loretta, and his voice dipped. "You were right. Whatever that thing is, it's not here to fight. It's looking for something else. She nodded. It already found it. You just never knew what you were looking at. Kincaid stepped back off the porch, boots echoing on the planks, and paused at the bottom step. I want to help. Coulter's jaw tightened. Loretta nodded, slow. Then help us find a way home. That night, the wind picked up around midnight. The trees groaned, rubbing bark against bark like bones settling in an old grave. In the shed, the mother stirred again. She hadn't slept long. Her body still bore the weight of infection, though the fever had begun to recede. She moved with the grace of something built for survival, but not used to pain. Sprig curled against her side, twitching occasionally in his dreams. His face had grown more defined lately, sharper but still young. His hands had gotten stronger. He used them to grip branches now, to lift stones, to shield his mother when she flinched in her sleep. Coulter watched from the window, breath fogging the glass. He hadn't sat down in hours. When the shed door creaked open, he didn't move. The mother stepped out first, her form a shadow against the mist. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look free either, just tired. Sprig followed, slower, glancing back toward the porch light, toward where Loretta had left a folded towel and a thermos of broth. He didn't touch them, just watched. Then they began to walk. Not far, just to the edge of the tree line. Then she stopped. Loretta came out quietly, her sweater wrapped tight, her hands empty. She didn't speak. The mother turned, looked back once, and raised her hand to her chest. That motion again, flat palm, slow drop, and Loretta mirrored it. They stood like that for a moment. Two figures separated by species and story, bound by something older than either. Then the mother turned, placed her hand gently on Sprig's back, and led him into the woods. Maisie woke just after dawn. She rubbed her eyes and wandered out to the porch, barefoot and groggy. She stepped into the dew-wet yard and looked around, confused. Then she saw it, on the railing, a strip of cloth, her old ribbon, tied in a knot that looked clumsy and too big, but clearly deliberate. She held it in both hands and whispered, "He remembered." Loretta watched from the kitchen window, tears she didn't name running silent down her cheeks. Inside the diner, the radio crackled. Coulter walked over, picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was clipped, official, and far too awake for that hour. "State Forestry Patrol. We've got a team heading to your sector. Someone reported unusual movement near Willow Run. Large tracks, unconfirmed." Coulter swallowed. "When?" "Wheels up at 5. Should be entering your grid by mid-morning." He set the radio down slow. Looked at Loretta. She met his gaze without blinking. "We have to move them," he said. She nodded. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the scent of pine and wet stone. Change was coming, and it wasn't going to knock. The next morning cracked open with a silence that didn't feel natural. The kind that hangs low over fields like fog that forgot how to rise. It was the last full week of October, and the chill had finally settled into the bones of Willow Run. The grass in the lower pastures had gone brittle and gold, and the pine needles that carpeted the trail south of County 12 snapped underfoot like dried twigs in a fire pit. Everyone who'd been watching the weather knew this was the last good stretch before the cold came fast and mean. The kind that doesn't just freeze water, but stories. Loretta knew it too. That's why she didn't wait. By first light, they were already moving. The whole crew, Coulter, Loretta, Amos, Maisie, and even Wade Kincaid, had gathered behind the diner with packs slung over their backs and coolers strapped to a sled that once belonged to a ranger dog. No one said much. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't already been carried in looks, in the quiet of coffee poured without asking, in nods passed between headlights in the dark. The mother stood just inside the tree line, shoulders square, her shape blending into bark and shadow, watching them. Sprig stood beside her, upright now, nearly shoulder height on Maisie. His fur had thickened, the silver streaks across his back catching pale light in soft threads. His hands, still long and human-like, curled with slight nervousness as he watched the preparations. He wasn't shaking anymore. He wasn't hiding, but he wasn't sure. Coulter approached first, unarmed, hands open. The mother didn't flinch. She'd come to know the difference between predators and protectors. He nodded toward the trail leading toward the Old South clearing. Water's still flowing through there. Springs haven't dried in years. She gave no sign of understanding, but she followed. So did Sprig. They moved slow. The woods had eyes. Not eyes like Kincaid's lens, hungry for evidence, but the kind that belonged to things older than fences and maps. Deer tracks crossed their path once. A family of raccoons scattered up a hollowed birch. Crows followed them for a time, then fell behind. Nothing dared to lead. By midday, they reached the southern meadow, a stretch of high grass and scattered stone outcroppings that dipped toward a stream lined in cedar and willow. Coulter had camped there years ago, back when the forestry map still marked it as unsurveyed. Now the lines were blurred, unclaimed. It was as far from roads and hunters as you could get without climbing into the clouds. They stopped at the creek's edge. The mother drank first, kneeling low, shoulders loose for the first time in weeks. Sprig followed, dipping his face near the current, letting the water run over his wrists. Loretta set down the cooler and opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in layers of canvas and ice packs, were fresh cuts of venison, rabbit, trout. They didn't offer it directly. They just placed it near a flat rock and stepped back. The mother didn't touch it. She nudged Sprig forward. This time he didn't hesitate. He took a piece of trout, sniffed it, then crouched and began to eat. The others watched without speaking. There was something almost holy about it. A line had shifted. A boundary crossed. Not with force, but choice. Amos was the one who broke the stillness. If we're gonna teach him, now's the time. Coulter nodded. He's watching everything. They began that afternoon. Coulter walked the perimeter of the meadow, pointing to tracks left in the soft dirt. Deer, possum, once a mountain lion weeks old. Sprig followed him closely, stepping where he stepped. Coulter knelt near a tuft of grass and rubbed it between his fingers. "Smell that?" he said, turning to Sprig. "That's where they bedded down." Sprig leaned in, sniffed, then placed his hand over the spot. Later, Wade and Coulter set up a line of field markers, small feathers, bones, scraps of cloth tied to branches. They didn't explain. They just walked the loop again, letting Sprig learn the difference between wind-carried scent and grounded ones. Maisie watched all of it with quiet wonder. She didn't follow the men. She stayed with Loretta near the stream, picking leaves and pressing them between pages of an old book she'd brought. When Sprig passed by again, she held up one, a crimson-red maple, and he paused. He touched it gently, then looked at her. She smiled. "For you." He didn't take it, but he looked at her the same way he looked at the running water, like something trusted. As the sun dropped low, painting everything in gold, they watched the mother rise. She walked out into the meadow's edge where a small herd of deer had been grazing earlier. They were gone now, but their scent lingered. She crouched. Coulter froze. "Watch this," he whispered. Sprig did. The mother stilled every part of herself, even her breath. She moved with the wind, not against it, letting the scent pass without warning. Then, like a shadow breaking free from stone, she moved, swift, low, precise. Not to strike, just to teach. Sprig followed the pattern. Stalk, pause, breathe. It was clumsy at first. His foot cracked a twig. He moved too fast. But the mother didn't scold. She waited. He tried again. The second time, he moved quieter. The third, nearly silent. At the end of the field, Coulter had set a line of logs to simulate a chase path. Sprig reached them, vaulted one without falling. He reached back to help Maisie, who dared to follow. She slipped on the mossy edge of a stone, and in a blink, he grabbed her sleeve and pulled her to her feet. She stumbled into him, startled, then laughed.
You saved me,
she whispered. Sprigg didn't smile, but his eyes softened. Loretta watched from the edge of the clearing. A hand pressed to her chest. Wade stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, staring at the boy who now moved like something that belonged to the forest, but still remembered how to care for something small. She's teaching him to live, Wade said. Loretta shook her head slowly. She's teaching him to choose. That night, they made camp along the ridge above the meadow. The fire burned low. More smoke than flame, just enough for warmth and a circle of safety. Sprigg sat beside the mother, chewing on dried meat, eyes half-lidded with tired satisfaction. Maisie leaned against Loretta's arm, whispering a story about a dragon and a bear that became friends. Loretta didn't follow the plot, but she didn't need to. Amos brewed coffee on the camp stove. Wade took the last trap from his pack, a brutal contraption with rusted teeth, and walked it to the edge of the gully where an old fault line split the rock. He knelt and dismantled it piece by piece, hands slow, methodical. When he was done, he buried the parts deep, one by one. No ceremony, just closure. He returned and handed a folded map to Coulter. Marked every spot I ever set one. You'll know where not to step. Coulter didn't say thank you. He just took it. The radio crackled again that evening, back in the diner, miles away. Loretta had turned the volume down low, but they all knew what was coming. State Patrol checking in, search grid expanding south, possible sighting confirmed. Wade looked up from the fire. Tomorrow? Early. Everyone knew what that meant. Tomorrow was the last night. Sprigg slept with one hand still gripping the maple leaf Maisie had given him. The wind changed sometime after midnight, blowing westward, and in the hush that followed, the mother opened her eyes, stared into the woods, and exhaled so slow it barely moved the air. She knew. They all did. But for tonight there was still warmth, still quiet, still a sliver of wildness left that hadn't been mapped, hunted, or explained. And it belonged to them. Just a little while longer. The first light of December fell cold and thin through the bare limbs of the Ouachitas. Frost clung to the low hollows like breath that had settled overnight and forgotten how to lift. A hush hung across the ridge behind Willow Run, the kind of stillness that comes only once the leaves have dropped and the birds have left, and even the wind seems reluctant to break the quiet. It was the kind of morning that felt like a goodbye before anyone said a word. Loretta stood by the porch railing in her wool coat, steam rising from the mug in her hand, watching the road below slowly shift from gray to gold. The old gravel ruts that curved away from County 12 caught the light like memory. Faint, familiar, fragile. Behind her, the back door creaked open and shut. Footsteps followed. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Coulter came up beside her, rubbing his gloved hands together, the radio crackling in his coat pocket. "They're in town," he said. "Forest Patrol. I saw the trucks turn off 17 about 10 minutes ago." She nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Then we don't have long." Behind them, in the shed that had become more sanctuary than shelter, the mother stood ready. Her wounds had healed enough to carry weight again, though the limp remained, faint but real. Sprigg stood beside her, taller now, still not yet grown, but no longer something helpless. His fur caught the frost in strands of silver. His breath came steady in the cold. He was watching Loretta. Maisie stood nearby, holding the ribbon Sprigg had once tied back in the fall. She had wanted to give it to him again, but this time she didn't offer it out loud. She just held it in her fist, tucked into her sleeve, letting her silence speak for her. Wade Kincaid helped lift the final bundle of supplies into the sled. A pack of smoked venison, a canvas pouch filled with matches and dried herbs, one of Amos's old flannel shirts. He didn't ask where they were going. He didn't need to. He just gave the mother one long look, not for proof or curiosity, but in something closer to apology. She didn't look back, but she had already forgiven him in the way she no longer flinched when he passed. Coulter led them toward the edge of the clearing where the ground began to dip into the hidden ravine. A long corridor of ancient stone and mossy overgrowth that wound its way east toward the springs, and beyond that, the higher timber where no patrols ever ventured. A place no one logged, no one hunted. The kind of place maps forgot on purpose. They traveled in silence, feet crunching frost and kicking up powdery dirt. The sun warmed nothing. Their breath hung behind them like faint smoke trails, vanishing into the branches. Every few paces, Sprigg would look back. Not in fear, just to mark the faces, the sounds, the memory of people who hadn't tried to trap him. An hour in, they reached the stream, narrow but still running, its surface barely rippling as it slid beneath a fallen log. The mother paused there. Loretta stepped forward. They stood across from each other once more. No words, just a moment. Then, the mother raised her hand, pressed it to her chest, and lowered it slowly to the ground. Loretta did the same, though her hand trembled, and then she whispered, "Thank you." Sprigg turned to Maisie. He walked slowly, stopping just in front of her. She didn't say anything, didn't reach, but she held the ribbon out, unfolded now. He took it in both hands, looked at it. Then, instead of keeping it, he placed it carefully back into her palm and closed her fingers around it. She blinked fast, but no tears fell. He stepped back. Then, without ceremony or sound, the mother turned, Sprigg beside her, and they disappeared into the cedars, their forms fading like fog into the deeper wild. No one moved, not for a long time. Eventually, Coulter exhaled. "That's it." Loretta didn't answer. She was still watching the trees, the gap where 2 lives had vanished. They walked back slower than they came. By the time they reached the diner, the patrol trucks were already passing through the main road, tires stirring dust, eyes scanning woods that no longer held what they were looking for. Coulter wrote the report before nightfall, the official version, the kind that gets archived and forgotten. He signed it with a steady hand. "Large animal tracks present. No confirmed sightings. Territory vacated." Nothing more. Nothing less. That night, Loretta left the porch light on, out of habit more than hope. The air had turned sharp again, biting at the edges of window panes. Inside, Maisie sat at the counter, drawing something with crayons on the back of an old placemat. Trees and a stream, and 2 figures disappearing into the pines. She didn't show it to anyone. The next morning, Loretta rose early, same as always. She poured the coffee, checked the radio, swept the front step before the frost had fully melted. When she opened the door, she stopped. On the top step, placed gently, was a single dried reed of prairie grass, slightly curled, pale gold, wrapped at the base with a strand of bark. "No note, no tracks, just that." She stared at it a long time. Maisie appeared beside her, her voice low, steady. "Be gentle." Loretta bent down, picked up the reed, and held it to her heart. The step beneath her creaked. The wind stirred the trees behind the diner, and for just a moment, in the distance past the fog, she thought she saw 2 amber eyes watching from the ridge. Not afraid, not hidden, just present. And then they were gone. But the feeling stayed. The forest didn't forget kindness. It never had. And somewhere deep within it, beneath the limbs and shadows and layers of time, a boy who wasn't quite a boy anymore was learning how to live wild, but not alone. Back in Willow Run, the diner opened right on time, and the coffee tasted the same. But for those who knew where to look, for those who had seen, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Sometimes, it takes something ancient, something misunderstood, something wild, to remind us what it means to be human. This story wasn't just about the unknown hiding in the woods, or the shadows we fear when the wind moves through the trees at night. It was about something much quieter, much closer. The invisible threads that bind us, across fear, across silence, across the vast distance between what we are and what we don't yet understand. There's a strange beauty in the way compassion moves. It never asks permission. It doesn't come wrapped in logic or reason. It shows up in the dark when no one's watching, and it simply chooses to stay, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs something. Especially then. We live in a world that often measures strength by noise, by size, by what can be proven. But maybe real strength is found in the quiet moments. When someone reaches out instead of turning away. When someone listens without needing to speak. When someone guards the sacredness of another life, simply because it's the right thing to do. Even if no one ever sees. Maybe the greatest courage isn't standing your ground. Maybe it's offering shelter, offering trust, offering love, when you have every reason to protect yourself instead. Some stories don't end with fanfare. They end with a gesture, a glance, a branch left on a doorstep, a promise kept in silence. And sometimes that's enough. Because the truth is, not all goodbyes are sad. Some are quiet beginnings in disguise, a reminder that we're not as alone in this world as we think. There are places in this country, off the map, outside the headlines, where kindness still echoes, not as an act, but as a way of life, where people don't need proof to believe, and hearts still recognize each other without words. And maybe, just maybe, those places are sacred because someone chose to protect the wild instead of expose it, to understand rather than explain, to love without needing to tame. So, wherever you are, whoever you are, may you carry that spirit with you. May you look at the world not just through your eyes, but through your heart. May you be gentle, not just with others, but with yourself. And may you remember that every small act of care leaves a mark, even if no one else sees it. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please consider leaving a comment below. We'd love to hear what it stirred in you. And if you'd like to walk with us through more stories like this, deep, quiet, human, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who still believes in goodness. Because out there, beyond the fences and roads, something sacred is still watching. And kindness, once given, is never truly lost.